Hey guys, welcome to The Big Bang Theory, a podcast where we give advice on things that we are just not experts on. Either way, we're glad you're here. Hope you learned something and laugh a little bit too. Hey guys, welcome back to The Big Bang Theory. So today's episode is going to be about something called a love bank. And if you guys were like me and TJ, we had no idea what this was until we heard of the concept. And then it just made sense. So honey, why don't you tell them what the concept of a love bank is?
Yeah, think about it as a bank account or an account into which you make deposits or withdrawals. But that is basically that account represents your relationship with your partner. And so, obviously a deposit is a positive thing. A withdrawal is a negative thing that could have an impact on the relationship. And at the end of the day, there's a running balance, right? As you're making more deposits, that balance goes up. As you make withdrawals, that balance goes down.
And it's not just in romantic relationships. Every person that you interact with, whether it's your parents, your kids, your coworkers, your best friends, everybody that you have a relationship with, you have a love bank or a bank account with. And that's why you love to be around certain people and then you don't like to be around other people. So first of all, I want to jump in and say we did not come up with this concept. We actually read about it in a book by Willard Harley. We've read a few of his books and he is fantastic at relationships. So if you're interested, go check out some of his books.
One of the other things I think is really important to mention right here at the very beginning as it relates to the love bank or the bank account, it differs with each person. And so, your relationship with your even amongst your children, what might be a deposit into one kid's bank account could be a withdrawal from another. And so we're going to dive into more of that as we get deeper into the episode, but wanted to highlight that here at the very beginning.
Yeah. And the reason why it's important is that if you want to have a good relationship with your spouse, your kids, your friends, it is important to understand what is a positive deposit for them and then what things you're doing are withdrawing from that account. And if you get to the point where you're negative, right, just like you would be at the bank, it's a really bad thing. And you're going to start seeing resentment and affairs and all of those things happen. And obviously we don't want that to happen. So let's talk about deposits and withdrawals. Like, what are some examples of deposits that you've made into my account?
Oh boy. What types of deposits are we talking about, Ms.
You made a
Bain?
deposit last night. Just kidding.
I wish. So again, going back to what I said earlier, deposits and withdrawals, it's so important that you understand what might be a deposit and withdrawal with each relationship in your life, especially those that you value the most. And so as it relates to yours, I understand what your love language is. I understand the things that make you happy that are positive, such as giving compliments, keeping my word if I say I'm going to do something and then actually doing it, helping you feel secure and safe, those types of things, helping out with the kids, understanding for you. And again, this is where it's important, not what would be a deposit for me, but what would be a deposit for you. And then making sure that I'm doing a good job of doing that. And also obviously understanding the withdrawals, because withdrawals sometimes have an even bigger impact than do the deposits into the account as well.
Yeah, actually. So let's say that something positive you do for me would be worth 5 points. If you do something negative, a withdrawal, it could be a withdrawal of minus 20. So you'd have to do so many more positive things in order to even out.
I agree. In fact, maybe we can get into some examples, in fact, of maybe some of the areas in the past that may have been deposits or withdrawals so that people can understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I have a really good example. So I grew up being really criticized. I don't know if it's just an Asian thing. I don't know if it's a parent thing. And so I naturally became a criticizer, which I have worked on, and I feel like I'm 1,000 times better. I'm sure TJ will not say the same. But anyway, so back in the day when we were first married, TJ would do the dishes, for example, right? I'd see him do the dishes, which is a great thing. But rather than me saying, "Oh, hon, thanks for doing the dishes," I would say something like, "Did you have to splash water all over the place?" And so for TJ, it was like a double slap in the face. A, he didn't even get a thanks for doing the dishes. And then B, he got criticized for getting water all over the place. And so that was a really big withdrawal that I was making from his bank account that I didn't know. Because for TJ, getting criticized is the value of that is so much higher than the value of me getting criticized because I'm so used to it. So I hope that makes sense where like everybody has different value points on like positive things and negative things.
Now, a couple of examples of some withdrawals that I made from your account. And I'm totally comfortable talking about this because this was years ago. But one of the biggest issues that I struggled with was that I had a pornography addiction that I had been battling ever since I was a kid. And I knew how much that hurt Bong when I would do that stuff. And so I would hide it from her. And then, ultimately the truth would come out, or she would find it, or she'd find out that I'd been looking at it. And every time that would happen, as you could imagine, that was a massive withdrawal from her and her account. And in another way too, Bong is, you guys will...
Hang on. Before you go into that, for me, yes, it was the porn. It's terrible. And I think porn is horrible and it's detrimental to our society. But my thing is, I really, really value honesty always. And so for me, it wasn't just about the porn. It was the secrecy. It was hiding it. So that takes a lot of points away from me because I feel like I'm so honest with TJ and with everyone around me that when people aren't honest with me, it takes away a lot of points. And it's not just TJ. It's with my kids. It's with my friends. I cannot handle lies. So anyways, go ahead with the next thing.
Well, and just to tie that up, I think that was a really tough predicament for me to be in because I recognized it was almost a lose-lose either way. Because if I tell you the truth that I was looking at it, then that hurts because no spouse wants to know that their spouse is lusting after another person. And so, not to justify my behavior in any way, shape, or form, but it was a really tough predicament to be in. Fortunately, we've moved past that. The next way, though, for her was really Bong telling the truth, as she just kind of mentioned, is very, very important. And so when I would give her my word, and I would say this is really kind of a masculine, feminine thing. Women want to know they can trust their partner. And I wouldn't even say women. I think people in general, you want to feel like you can trust the person you're with. So when I would give her my word that I was going to do something and then I didn't, even if it was, I didn't mean to, like an example would be, I would tell her I was going to do something, then a friend would call me on the phone. And because I'm very relationship centered, I would jump on the phone call and then neglect to do that thing that I told her I would do. So again, but at the time I didn't realize it was that big of a withdrawal. Fortunately, she was able to tell me that, and we've been able to work through that as well. So I guess we've talked a little bit about withdrawals. Maybe we can give some ideas or some examples of deposits.
We've talked about this before. And so I know that in the past, when we were still first married and learning how to do this whole marriage thing, I remember, TJ, you said that a lot of times when you would do something for me, you kind of had like an ulterior motive, like you were doing it because you wanted to get something back. Would you say that was true?
Well, yeah, a good example was one time you were in the shower and I was out vacuuming the living room, right? And you came out mid vacuum session and we had a little merry time and it was awesome. And so I literally vacuumed the living room every night thereafter, anytime you're in the shower. So yes, there was a part of me that was giving to get, I think would be a good way to say it.
Well, do you think that's the way people should do it though?
Oh, not at all.
So there's something we believe about like the ripple effect. I feel like if you serve your spouse or if you keep adding into their deposit, they can't help but eventually see that and give it back to you. And anyway, you shouldn't be in a marriage where you do something for your spouse wanting them to do something back, because that just sounds like a business transaction anyway. So I just feel like when you fill your partner's bank, like naturally they're going to want to fill yours up. And I know there's situations where that's not true and we can talk about that later, but yeah.
Well, to add to that, I think it's important. Again, I think it's important to have a little bit of a sit down with your spouse, with your child, with whomever it is, and explain to them, hey, your relationship really matters to me. And I understand there's things that I might do that really make you feel good and help and foster that relationship. There's also things I know I do that hurt you and that cause you to not trust me, etc. So let's talk about that and come up with some ideas of some ways that I can make a deposit into your account. And then talk to me about all the ways in which I make withdrawals. That way you understand that, so that when you're having those, when you're with your spouse, what will start to happen is when you focus on filling their bank account with deposits, as you mentioned with the ripple effect, it always comes back.
I agree. I'm trying to think of other ways that I've made deposits. So I think the important thing is knowing what your spouse needs. Like, what is considered a deposit for your spouse, right? Like, for me, honesty is really important and being really open with everything, but that's not important to everybody. Some people really love getting hugs and physical affection that isn't sex, like holding hands, back tickle, stuff like that. And you won't know until you talk to your partner, your friend, your kids, whoever it is, what they consider positive deposits. And so it's really important to do that. For example, TJ, he loves getting words of affirmation. And so I always try to say that. And I remember when we were kind of first really working on our marriage when we were younger, I put something on a Post-it note and I stuck it on the fridge. It was like something to remind me to do these things for TJ. And even while he was at work, I would send him a text that was like, thanks so much for going to work to provide for our family, little things like that. I'm trying to think, what other things do I even do? I have sex with you. That is a big deposit.
No, that is probably the biggest deposit well, I shouldn't say that. It's at least top 3.
Oh, yeah. Top 2.
Little note for you wives out there. I'm telling you, man, when you keep your husband satisfied in that way, he will go to hell and back to make sure that you are happy.
But that reminds me that sometimes you don't always love the deposit. Okay. I don't always want to do it with him, but I know that's what he needs. And that's what makes him happy. And that's what makes him feel loved. So I'm just saying.
Let's not pretend that you don't get something out of it as well.
Okay, whatever. That's not.
I wish my deposits into your bank account ended with me getting an orgasm. That would be dope.
You want a deposit in me every day. Let's be honest. But anyways, no, seriously, because I know that is important to TJ, that makes a big deposit on his account. Like, honestly, like if he's in a bad mood or something and we do it, the next day he has a little like skip in his walk. I'm not even kidding. And I'm sure you ladies who are listening, your men are probably the same way.
And I wish it wasn't like that, to be honest. Like in a perfect world, sex wouldn't be the most important thing. But the fact remains that it is. And again, that's why communication is so important. I think this really leads into the next kind of phase of this conversation. And that is keeping score.
Yeah. So I remember getting a DM or something from somebody saying, you know, what do you think about keeping score? Because I feel like I do this and I do this and I do this. And then he only does this and this. And it's like, that's so unhealthy. It's so unhealthy the thing is you can't like 5 tasks for one person maybe equal to 2 tasks for another person. I just don't think it's healthy to keep score.
It's not healthy, but it's very easy to fall into that. And it's a very slippery slope as well, because if you're in a place in your relationship where you guys you're not, you know, you're in one of those valley stages or one of those funks in the relationship where things aren't going super well, right? You can see there's a lot, you know, it could be very easy to be like, oh, well, I did this and I did that and I did that and he didn't do anything, or vice versa. And then before you know it, you're in an even worse spot. And so again, it's a very easy thing that people can fall into. But when you really think about it, it doesn't help anybody, because you're not going to feel any better if you're like, oh, well, I did this, this, and this, and he didn't do it. And it's not going to help your partner either.
But I get it though, because it's what society teaches us. It's like, what is it? Quid pro quo.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do for me? And like, that just does not work in a relationship. No relationship is 50-50. It just really isn't. Sometimes it's 80, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's like 40 and 40, and we've got to figure out the other 20%.
That's an interesting thing to think about, because as I look at we've got 20 plus years together, and there have been times where it has been, you know, maybe 60-40, 70-30, whatever.
I'm always the 6.
But I think it ebbs and flows. And if I look at our relationship over the past 20 years, I would say that it's 50-50 over the long haul. Whereas there might be times and stages, for example, you know, during the stages where you had depression, it was a lot easier for me to serve you. And because you were having a hard time, you know, for you to forget about making the deposits. But then that flipped big time once we went through that. And so again, I think, that's why you can't keep score. If you're focused on, I love my spouse and I'm committed to this relationship and I'm going to make deposits, what I would say is, even if you are making 70% and they're making 30, the day will eventually come, assuming that you guys are both working towards a healthy relationship where your partner sees that and then it flips.
Yeah. Plus, you're on the same team. When I think of keeping score, I think of like baseball because Zeke's on a baseball team. It's like you're on the same team. Doesn't matter if the team wins, you're both winning because you're on the same team. So, plus, for those of you who are Christian, I mean, the biggest reminder is like be like Jesus. He served people, he helped people, he loved people without any expectation, and he didn't do it because they're going to do this in return.
To add to that, if you don't mind, because that's my guy, I love Jesus. The thing that's so powerful about that is Jesus was the freest, happiest, most amazing person that's walked this earth. And the reason he was free and the reason he was so happy is because he did not have an expectation. It was because he walked the path of love, and he knew that when he loves, love always comes back. That's the way the universe works. What you put out comes back to you always. And so his focus was on loving others. And so when we do that with our spouse, with our child, with our friend, it's always going to come back.
Okay, so what do we do if you find yourself in a spot where you're like, oh man, I'm recognizing this now. I am keeping score. What would you say are the steps to stopping that?
I think awareness is the first and most important, because if you don't know what you don't know. And so if you're keeping score, but you're not aware of it. So as soon as you become aware of it, it's like first find gratitude. Okay, cool. I'm aware of it. And then you start asking yourself, well, why am I doing this? Like, what is it I'm hoping to get out of this? But I think, again, I would just say for me personally, becoming aware of it is always the most important part.
And then obviously, I mean, we talk about this all the time, but communication. If you are keeping score, there's something that you are not telling your spouse. Because if you've been keeping score, you've probably been feeling some sort of resentment for a period of time where rather than telling your spouse, you're keeping score in your head. Wouldn't you say? Like if they're keeping score, there's some kind of miscommunication happening.
Yeah, and there's resentment that's boiling underneath the surface, which doesn't help either. What I have found for me, and I've done this before, I have found communication is so important. So another way of when you become aware that you're keeping score is I believe in radical accountability, responsibility. And so you own it, right? And so in the event that I were keeping score, I would become aware of it. And then I would come to you and I'd say, honey, I realized over the last couple of weeks, I've been keeping score. I've been doing this, and this in hope of getting this in return. And I'm sorry. I think that communication, sometimes just speaking it out can be very powerful.
Okay. So I got another DM and it's like kind of hard to answer, but I figured let's just try. So somebody asked, what happens if you are giving all the time and then you get nothing back? What do you do? That's tough.
That's real tough.
And it's almost like a whole other podcast episode topic, just because not that I'm saying it's time to leave, but there are certain times that it's like, it's okay to end a relationship.
That's where my mind was going to go is maybe that's a reflection point, because so relationships are important, right? I'm not saying don't value your spouse, don't value your child or your friend. But if you honestly feel like you're putting in all the effort and getting nothing back, again, that's where communication comes in. And you would go to that person and have that conversation with them and say, to me, it feels like I'm doing this and I'm not getting this in return. But to your point, hon, like divorce isn't always a bad thing. Deciding that you can still love somebody, but they're not for you, that's not a relationship you're going to continue to invest your time in. That's not always a bad thing. And so I think in those moments, you have to get very real with yourself. How important is this relationship to me? And depending upon how important it is, you should also have the conversation with them and communicate how you feel so that you can start to work through that.
Yeah, I mean, you went straight to divorce. But I, first of all, would say, how long has it been happening? Is it years? Is it just a few weeks? Is it just a slump in your marriage and you just need to be the 80% while they're the 20%? Or has it been years of like you doing everything? And then also, have you told them? If you have not told them and you're mad at them for not being able to read your mind, that's your fault. There's this quote that I saw, and I can't remember who said it, where I saw it, whatever. But I remember it said, if somebody is mad at you and they haven't told you that they're mad at you, it's not your problem. Because I can't read your mind. Anybody that tells me that I did something that hurts their feelings, I will 100% make the effort to change that. But if they don't tell me, how am I supposed to know? So.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that as well, if you do if that's a relationship where of mutual interest and value, one or two things are going to happen when you sit down with that person, have the conversation. First one, they're going to see and realize, what it is. They're going to understand where you're coming from, and they're going to then make the effort to be better, right? Or you'll both decide to part ways, maybe not right away, but eventually. But at the very least, like it provides that good opportunity for both of you to reflect on the relationship and either make the changes or decide that maybe we can love each other, but just not continue in this relationship.
All right. So I hope that somewhat answers the question. It's a tough one, and it just depends on like everybody's situation. But I wanted to talk about in your relationships that are super important to you, for the most part, they should be in the positive. They should have so much in there that when you make mistakes, and I say win because it is win, it takes away from their account, but you're still in the positive because you've done so much good and so many things for them that when you make a little mistake, it's okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, I'm not the perfect dad. I make my share of mistakes, but I'm constantly trying. And, we've done a really good job of sitting down with our kids and understanding what those deposits are. And my focus every day, I'm constantly focused on how can I pour into this kid? How can I make deposits into my kids' accounts? And I've just seen time over time where, because of the amount of deposits that I've consciously been putting into their accounts, in the moments where I fall short as a dad, they're so quick to forgive me and so quick to move past.
So as we're talking about this topic, I want you to remember that it's not just about your partner, your spouse. It is also with your kids. We have these bank accounts with our kids, and you think about when kids grow up and they don't ever want to see their parents again. I would think that because for all the years they lived under their roof, their account was negative, but they weren't able to do anything about it because you have to live at home. So you want to make sure that you have a relationship with your kid where they're going to want to come back and hang out with you when they choose to, like when they have the ability to do so. But I also think that kids are more forgiving than adults. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's easier for us to deposit into their account. I think they're a lot more accepting of love, and they reward so many more points so much easier just because they haven't been tainted by the world, haven't had their hearts hardened and stuff like that. So
yeah, I agree. Kids are great examples of that. But again, no two kids are alike. And so I can't stress this enough. You guys know, if you're parents, how completely different, all of your kids can be. And so I've found that when I have moments, like when I'm taking my youngest boy to school every morning, I have conversations with him. I ask him, what are some of the things that you think dad's doing really well? What are some areas I can improve upon to make you feel more loved, to make you feel more confident, to help you, feel more secure in our home? And I have these conversations with my kid on an ongoing basis. Not only are kids different, but they also change, right? So the answers that Kyson would have given me at 5 years old are going to be very different than the answers he's going to give me at 16 years old. And so as parents, I think anytime we can take that opportunity to really have that conversation, the fact that you're having that conversation with your kids matters. And they're going to love that because they're going to feel seen and heard. But then when you take that and you start to apply that, that's where the kids, that's another way for that kid to really know how much they're loved.
Well, that's a good segue into the challenge of the week. So if you guys are new here, every week we like to have a challenge where we send you off with something that you can do to improve your life, your relationship, whatever it is. And this kind of goes right into it. So for the challenge of the week, you can either do this with your spouse, you can do this with your kids, you can do it with everybody. Sit down and ask them, what things can I do to make you feel loved, which in turn adds value to your bank account? And then write those things down. And then hopefully, if it's your spouse and hopefully if it's your kids, they'll say, what can I do for you to make you feel loved? And then it will be a great circle of happiness. All right, guys. So that's it for this episode. If you learned anything, if it made you laugh, if it made you cry, would you do us a favor and leave us a 5-star review? If it's not going to be 5 stars, just pretend I didn't even say that. And you can follow us on Instagram at The Big Bang Theory, where we do stories and polls and have so much fun. See you guys later. Bye.